is critical that you have a super high value, super actionable piece of content that you can deliver to your audience. We love assessments. We love checklists. We love things that somebody can literally take and own and truly engage with so that they are deriving their own benefit. And you're the one that helped them put that into action. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Marketing Blender Show. I'm Dacia Coffee.
And I'm Daisy McCarty.
Now today we are talking about B2B webinar best practices. And I don't want you to just think webinar. I want you to think video. I want you to think informational, high value content, long form content that is delivered visually. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this because we are still huge fans of webinars and the like. And there are so many examples where people just miss out on the real value and the long tail of results that you can get in B2B from this type of thing if you take the time to do it right. So I'm super excited to get really nitty gritty about how to do this effectively.
I think there was a glut of webinars during COVID.
Yes.
And people got webinared out. And then there's been this ongoing perception that webinars don't work. That's not true.
100%.
People got really tired of webinars that were a waste of their time. 0 people got tired of webinars that delivered high value, actionable content.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can think of personal times where I watched a webinar that was so good, I saved it and went back to it, went back to the recording. That's what's possible. I mean, talk about thought leadership and the anchoring effect that has in my mind for that brand and that speaker or presenter. Hello, like why would you not want that? And so you've got to do it correctly. Now we've got to talk about the number one thing. The number one thing in B2B webinars is having an amazing title. And this is about giving your audience what they want in their words. Don't bother doing a B2B webinar if you do not have an amazing title.
Absolutely. So, and that ties directly into having an amazing topic. So it has to be a hot topic. It should be something that they can't get really good information on somewhere else.
Yeah, well said.
And it should be something that they can act on. So yes, you need to have that topic selected. That is the thing that everybody must have. And then you have to not call it something boring.
Yeah.
And this is to all my engineers and my tech company clients. Doesn't matter how awesome the topic is if you call it something boring. So I want to give examples of good titles. There are several that are really well performing for us here at Blender, and we do them year after year because it's the thing that people need. They're having trouble getting good information elsewhere. But the titles are the thing that really grab attention. So we just did 8 ways to get more B2B leads in the next 90 days. At a trade show yesterday. We had 100 people in the room and 50 people who could not get into the room, who were just begging for the replay afterward because we didn't have seats enough for everybody who wanted that topic. Everybody wants leads, and they were being told, what's the timeline on which this is going to impact me? So we're being given a clear benefit. 5 ways to make your brand impossible to ignore.
Yep.
And then the highest attendance I've ever had on a webinar on LinkedIn was 25 ways to make your social media work better this year. So again, it's very specific. It tells people not just, hey, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that, but this is the benefit of attending this webinar. This is what's going to change for you as a result of being at the webinar. So when you think about your title, think about what's going to change for this person as a result of attending.
Yeah, I've got 2 that I use frequently that get extremely high attendance rates. One webinar in particular is called The 3 Dirty Little Lies of Marketing That Are Killing Your Return on Investment. And I mean, they had record-breaking numbers at a SCORE regional event because of this. And it was so fun. And obviously, we are big fans of concise, numbered topics sometimes because then as a speaker, you are required to deliver clarity and specificity. So that's one of the reasons I love that is there's such a clear value proposition in the description because your title is holding you accountable to that. And then also the dirty little lie. I mean, I like playing around with it as long as it's alluring, you know, and then we have learned return on investment. So I've got a couple of different ones I won't roll through, but return on investment is such a pain point for most of our audience members that titles around how to solve that and actionable steps, not just conceptual discussion around it, have been extremely effective.
And I would like to say that not all of our webinars have been massively successful. We've tested a lot of topics and a lot of titles. And I've run some webinars where I've had just a handful of people and they were like, oh my gosh, this is life-changing information. But it wasn't a hot enough topic to attract a large enough audience. So sometimes it doesn't even matter how valuable the information is. If it's not the thing people think they want, it's very difficult to get people into a webinar.
You know, and this is a great place where SEO keyword research can help from an ideation standpoint. You know, so even if you're not doing this for SEO purposes, but you can find out high value, long tail keywords and that inform you, like what questions are people researching? What are they frustrated with? What are they looking for? And that can, even if it's not the exact thing you talk about, it can oftentimes give you the nuggets to go, oh, this is what people are literally taking time to search for and research. And then it also helps you, back to your point earlier, find out what information is really not being covered well, and then really drill down into that.
Another thing that you can do is look on LinkedIn, find out what your competitors are running webinars around on LinkedIn, because you can see how many people are registered. So you can tell a lot by how many people register to attend a webinar if that's the kind of topic that's hot. And if it is a hot topic and you have your own take on that and your own insights, absolutely. Go ahead and build your webinar around something that people are already showing interest in and already excited about.
You know, one of the other things too that we need to talk about is making sure that people define the goal of the webinar and thus clearly defining the audience. Like too frequently what we see is this broad webinar idea and no clarity around who's going to be in the audience, because there are webinars, especially ones that we do, that are actually specifically meant for our late stage prospects or even current customers in order to help them get more value from their engagement with us. We've got other ones that are very top of the funnel that are really trying to get our name out there and help us be thought leaders in the marketplace. And then there's the ones in the middle. So it's really identifying buyer's journey and who exactly, which buyers are we talking about? Why are they looking for this? What do they need? Because then that informs your call to action as well. Because if you're doing a top of the funnel webinar, do not ask for a discovery meeting or a first call. That is just like, hey, I saw you online and I'm asking you to marry me. Like, nope. Like, we need to be
Are you in my LinkedIn inbox?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So we all hate receiving that. But then we see companies do this frequently. And so defining the role, the goal, and the audience of the webinar is absolutely critical. The other thing too, I'm going to add in is that it clarifies the definition of winning. Because, for instance, if you are bottom of the funnel and you have 15 qualified prospects, that's amazing. Whereas if you're top of the funnel, 15 might be terrible because the goal was reach. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking for volume because you know there's going to be a lot less direct lead quality or lead impact because it's so far away from the point of the sale. So again, like numbers all about the context and the role and the goal of the webinar.
All right, let's talk about do's and don'ts.
Yeah, so we already kind of started some of them. Okay, what's the first one that you want to jump on?
Don't do a webinar at the last minute. This is like planning a conference the week before it happens. You're not going to have success. My rule of thumb is a minimum of 8 weeks in advance of the webinar date is when you should start inviting people. Not when you should start planning it, but when you should start actually trying to fill the webinar. 8 weeks may seem like a long time. It is not. It will go by fast when you start looking at the numbers and you're like, oh my gosh, we need to get these numbers up. It's a lot better to have a 2-month runway on that than a 2-day runway.
Yeah, and there's so many more resources you can do, like tapping your sales team and, using one-to-one in addition to one-to-many type of promotion. I hate that we have to say that one out loud, but it's so important. So the next one I've got for you guys is make sure you're tapping your co-promotion partners. So that halo effect is so powerful, but even better, it's way better to be reaching 20,000 people because you and other partners that benefit from this content are using all of your lists and all of your networks versus if you only have a 2,000 person reach that you can tap into. So connecting with co-promotion partners can be wildly effective. And why not? That's the whole point, especially if you have complementary offerings.
Absolutely. And the next do is one of my favorites. Do use polls during the webinar. Virtually every platform that you can use does these. Even if you just have a regular Zoom account, you can ask people to drop a yes or no in the comments. What you're doing by implementing polls is, number one, you're gathering market insights that you can then share later. And number two, and more important, you are training people to engage with you during the webinar. This helps retention rate during the webinar, and it also helps you encourage people to make micro decisions that are toward that final goal of saying yes to a discovery call or saying yes to a demo with your team. So polls are fantastic. Make sure that they are topical, interesting, clearly written. Short questions are better than long questions, and feel free to throw in a fun one now and then.
Agreed. I love that, because an audience member is there for themselves. But it's a great segue into don't do webinars by yourself. Do not do a webinar alone. Now, what we mean is it might be about having somebody behind the scenes. So encouraging chats, commenting to people. And by the way, you need to prompt this. So Daisy is right on point about the poll functionality, but there's so many other functionalities. Chats are so fun. They're fun to be a part of on the webinar, where attendees are talking to other attendees, and then there's somebody behind the scenes that maybe is the MC of the chat and is answering and encouraging and collecting questions. But as a speaker, you cannot speak and organize and comment and grab questions effectively. And so you really want those roles clearly delineated. And it's just a relief, because if something's going a little awry, then there's somebody else picking things up and helping and noticing and really advocating for that audience point of view. Now, I'm also going to toss out, I personally, maybe this is just my opinion, I personally prefer to see multiple people on a webinar, even their face. Like, even if it's, hey, we have got a person that's introducing the topic or facilitating the conversation. I love conversations as long as they're not terribly long. So if you're going to have two people, keep it tight. Like, we should make sure you've practiced. I think that's another add-on about this, is like, make sure that there's been some practice. But I just prefer, multiple points of view. I think for me, oftentimes it's more engaging than one person.
I agree. And absolutely a practice session, even if you've done the webinar before, even if you've used the webinar platform before, do a test run.
Yeah.
And not just of the presenters, but invite people from your team to be sample attendees so they can tell you if there's something off about the user experience, because what you're seeing from a presenter standpoint may not be what they're experiencing as well.
100%.
Little tip for making sure that people feel more engaged in your webinar is start with your face on the screen. Don't start with your first slide on the screen. Yes, there can be a title there so people know they're in the right place. But when you start with people coming in an online environment, which is very disconnected anyway, and the first thing they see, or the only thing that they see, is just a slide instead of another human, you're training them that this is going to be a digital only experience, that they might as well be just watching a pre-recorded version of this rather than being in a live conversation with you as the presenter. So make sure your face is on there first thing that they see.
I absolutely love this one. And I would agree that also I want to see them end the slideshow and show their face during Q&A. Yes. There's really no reason, once you've had that final slide up for a while, like appropriate while, if there's a QR code or an email that they need to grab, but they're going to screenshot it. So once that's done, take it down and then engage with your audience live. If you're taking live questions, so that people can see those faces and just really build that community appeal. I could not agree more. I think people, and I know you definitely agree with me on this one, people should start the webinar on time. It doesn't matter if you had 250 registrants and only 3 people, God forbid, are on time. Start on time. I mean, there's just this professionalism that is appropriate, and it shows that you are no nonsense. You have value to dive into. And yeah, people are going to be late, but it's even more appealing for them to be like, oh, wow, what did I miss? And they're already going, So, I hate jumping onto a webinar and it's 5 minutes, 7 minutes later. I mean, literally, there have been times where I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'll just watch the recording. And I may or may not
Might
have
or might not.
decided to come back to that.
I was actually at a music venue last month, and half the people did not show up on time, and they held that show for half an hour for the rest of the people who are ticket holders to show up. And I'm like, close the doors.
Yeah.
If they show up late, they can wait till intermission.
Exactly.
And it just showing that you value the time of the people who were punctual and were excited to show up. Very important.
Are you a CEO of a business-to-business company? Maybe you're a sales leader or a salesperson, or maybe you're in business-to-business marketing. Well, if so, I wrote a book for you, and it's called Corporate Caffeine. Business-to-business marketing is different, but there are certain predictable fundamental principles that will help you unleash your organizational potential and fill your pipeline sustainably. So you can find my book on Audible, on Amazon, on barnesandnoble.com, or any of your favorite retailers. Hope you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear your feedback.
So I like one that you had added in here about not just focusing on attendees. And this is kind of like not just focusing on SQLs or people who are ready for a conversation right now. So the people that show up live to see your webinar, if you're lucky, you might get half of them. Like that's a really, really good registrant to attendee ratio. But there are going to be a lot of people who wanted to make it but couldn't, or thought they would and then they didn't. That represents an even larger pool of people that you shouldn't be ignoring when you're thinking about what you're going to be doing with your webinar. So the long tail that Dacia mentioned earlier of your webinar is you can slice and dice it. You can create shorts, you can create transcripts to generate content for social media. You can put a landing page on your website. You can have a form if it's a high value webinar for people to actually become future leads for you. So think about all the ways you're going to be using your webinar as evergreen content to continue delivering value beyond just the live session.
You know, and I think for me, it increases return on investment so much that hopefully it encourages people to spend the attention and the time on a great title, on a great topic, on the diligent research to really make this something of substance. Because if you can have it producing results for a very long time, then hopefully it encourages those best practices to do it well, you know, and so it's kind of this virtuous circle. So why don't we talk about LinkedIn Lives versus recorded webinars, for instance, like on like Zoom webinars or something like that.
Yeah. So this is something that a lot of people find confusing, but there are lots of different ways to run a live webinar. You can have a live Zoom webinar, you could have a live Teams webinar, there are a jillion different platforms out there, or you can have a LinkedIn Live. Now, LinkedIn is obviously going to tell you that LinkedIn Lives are the best thing since sliced bread. Sometimes LinkedIn Lives work for specific types of marketing and specific types of personalities. I have seen through the years a few people in my network who actually get a lot of value out of LinkedIn Lives, but they are personality-driven brands where people will see them pop up live in a feed and they're like, oh, I want to go watch so-and-so talk because it's always a good time. And it doesn't matter what that person is talking about. I just want to be in on the conversation. So that's one way that LinkedIn Lives can be helpful, especially if you have a regular cadence, like every Wednesday at such and such, join me for my LinkedIn Live. If you have that kind of following and that kind of audience and you have that kind of personality, LinkedIn Lives can be helpful. I find that there are more cons than pros when it comes to LinkedIn Lives because you're missing out on a lot of the pre-marketing and post-marketing that's available with other platforms. So for most of my B2B clients, I recommend that they get a Zoom webinar account. It's about $600 for the whole year. It's not expensive. It's a format that most people are already familiar with using, so it's not very difficult. And there's a ton of value that you get from being able to have that registration process in the Zoom webinar. You can do that on a LinkedIn event as well, but you get more information and more control when it's in Zoom. It will automate the reminders for you, so you don't have to do that. You can do a ton of branding within the platform itself. You can preload your polls, your questions, your surveys, your bio, your speaker headshot, all of that stuff within the platform itself, and it's repeatable. Also, afterward, you're going to have a lot of clarity into exactly who from that list actually used their unique Zoom link to attend. So you can not only see the number of people who attended, but the precise individuals who were on. And you'll also be able to see, you know, what was the overall outcome, and you have the ability to send follow-up emails. So it makes it much, much simpler. And again, the being live On a LinkedIn Live, it's there and it's gone. Yes, you'll get a recording afterward, but you don't have the way to follow up with people who may or may not have attended. With Zoom webinars, you get all of that and more.
Yeah, I think this is such a great point. I just want to reiterate to make sure people really understood. Yes, you can promote a recorded webinar in the LinkedIn platform, but to Daisy's point, you get a lot more control, like the ability to follow up. In LinkedIn Lives, you don't necessarily, depending on how you set up the settings and at what point in history you are watching this video, you don't necessarily get people's contact information when doing this. You know, the other thing that I want to toss in there, which is a little bit weird because technology is always changing, is we love being early adopters to tools. So both you and I were very hot on LinkedIn Live in the beginning. But we've both worked individually and communally hard on having a substantially large following. So our reach on LinkedIn Lives were pretty good. We already had people that were engaging with us. And when you're an early adopter, the tool really loves you for that.
Yes,
and so
it rewards you.
That's exactly right. And so then they really do promote you in order to promote their format, you know, and so you see kind of this slow decline in maximum effectiveness with tools. And so that's why best practices are so critical, because you can get that uptick back. But the caveat I do want to toss out there is, depending on when people see this, if there is a new tool out there and you are already effective at video communication, whether pre-recorded or live, jump on the tool.
Yes.
Do it. Like, adopt all the best practices that we're sharing now, but definitely get out there into technology land and benefit, you know, from that collaboration where a new tool needs a content creator. And wow, happy synergy and serendipity to be there in that first 6 months of any sort of new launch or new format. So, all right, adding value to webinars.
There's so much more than just running through a slide deck.
Yes.
So much more.
And you've got to remember, people are only going to remember two things you said. Like, they might enjoy the whole thing, but ask them 30 minutes from then and they're going to struggle with that. So it is critical that you have a super high value, super actionable piece of content that you can deliver to your audience. We love assessments. We love checklists. We love things that somebody can literally take and own and truly engage with so that they are deriving their own benefit. And you're the one that helped them put that into action. So wow, the tail on these type of tools is massive.
And I know you've mentioned a couple of times that you love in live in-person workshops if they give you a workbook that you can physically write in. Next best thing, if they're on a Zoom webinar, is they've received an email in advance that has a Google Doc or something that they can make their own notes in, and they can self-assess as they go along. So I love that one.
Well, people are less likely to check email if they feel like they're supposed to be engaging with a tool while you go. So, captive audience, yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that you can do during the webinar itself is, of course, a live giveaway. So it can be a fun giveaway. It can be, you know, one of your services or products for free giveaway, but having a little excitement around that. And again, teaching people to engage in the comments section. If you do a live spin the wheel during a webinar, it's a great way to add some fun and excitement to it. Don't do one where you get people to provide information and you're like, okay, we'll follow up and announce the winner later on social media, or we'll email them. Make it live. Make it where you have to be there to experience it. It makes people more excited to actually show up live to your next webinar because there are things happening that only they get access to.
Yeah. Do answer questions throughout your webinar. Now, you need to make some decisions about your personal presentation style and how you best facilitate. And there's multiple ways to do this. So let me give you an example. Going back to having an assistant or a partner that's answering questions live in chat. So then it's complementary to the content that you or your co-facilitator are presenting. You know, you might be the kind of speaker that likes to answer questions throughout. Make sure that you're watching the cadence on that and that you have predictable pauses or a way to watch when questions are arising. So this is, again, a really important reason on why you want to practice for this, because if you're inviting questions in throughout the webinar, then you need to be prepared to make that a really smooth audience experience. Now, we do encourage, make sure that you're answering questions relative to the content on the slide. Make sure that your assistant or partner is really grabbing the other questions that are more big picture and aggregating them for at the very end. And then obviously, doing Q&A at the end. One other best practice is we do recommend seeding some questions. And the reason is because oftentimes a question being asked gets other audience members brave or comfortable or engaged with whether or not their question is valid. Maybe the question makes them think of something else that they want to know. But oftentimes people need encouragement from their audience members to ask. And so we do love that. And what we recommend is choosing frequently asked questions that you've gotten in other presentations or live engagements or sales cycles where you're using your expertise to kind of predict oftentimes what audience members are asking if you haven't specifically covered that in the content.
I had an interesting experience with a recent webinar that I was invited to do, and I was doing the format where it was a 5-section webinar.
Yeah.
And I paused at the end of each section to take questions.
Love that.
And one of the attendees decided to get into the chat and start criticizing me for taking questions before the end of the webinar. And it was like, that was interesting. And it became evident through his long argument that I was mostly ignoring, that he didn't think it was worth his time to listen to other people asking questions. He just wanted to get through the content so that he could leave and get back to whatever was important. It was very interesting because that is an attitude that some people can have around pausing to take questions. But I think that's actually the most valuable part of doing a live webinar. And one of the reasons that people are on their live is so they can have their questions answered. And I find that the questions that they ask are usually very high value to people who are open to learning from someone other than just the expert presenter.
Yeah.
So I really do encourage people, if you're able to, without breaking the flow of your webinar, take some questions during it. That actually helps people stay on and stay engaged longer. And it provides a lot of value to be able to offer insights to people in the moment for the very specific things that they need help with right now.
Yeah, people ask great questions. One of the other happy benefits is there's been many times when we've been doing webinars and the audience member asked a question where we were like, wow, we have a tool for that. Like our clients, whether it's our content or our clients' content. And so then it was like, hey guys, we actually do have a tool. And then in the chat, live, added benefit, not even the predictable call to action or tool that we were assuming, all of a sudden they're getting, additional resources that they're engaging with. And now you're really getting them entrenched in the buyer's journey and being a partner to them. Love those. Yes, always offer the opportunity to watch a webinar on demand. That replay is so important. It also is anticipating that you have different personalities in the audience, where sometimes I'm one of those people because of my crazy schedule that I will sign up for a webinar knowing I cannot be live, but I will have booked time somewhere on my weekend or over a lunch break where I will go back to that on-demand replay. So I think this is so critical. And then, as we mentioned before, this is how you can create some evergreen content with a really thorough funnel.
The other thing that I always like to offer, in addition to offering the webinar replay, is give people a copy of the deck. Not in PowerPoint, make a PDF of it, but this is such a great value add, especially if they need to distribute that to other decision makers within their organization who may not have time to watch a 30-minute or 45-minute webinar. Having those key points or having things they can go back and read, especially if you have some slides that are text heavy that you may not have had time to go through in detail during the webinar, that's actually a way that you can encourage people to rewatch and to engage with the deck, is to have more content than they can possibly consume live, but having that deck available afterwards so they can do that self-study and really get all of the value and all of the juice out of that later. Very high value way to get a long tail out of your webinar.
And it's the number one request. If you have amazing content, it is the number one request. So just predict that you're going to get that. Okay, so hopefully you guys have been taking some notes, but there is a very specific way to QC a webinar, and it's with a checklist. We literally have over 20 points of planning, and guess what? You don't have to download a thing. You just have to check the show notes. So instead of walking you through all of those right now, we've listed them below for you. And we encourage you to go ahead and grab those and use it as your personal checklist just to be thorough and don't reinvent the wheel, right? Go ahead and engage with a process that is proven so that you have outstanding content for your audience. Now, we've been mentioning a couple examples, personal as well as clients, but you've got some pretty remarkable recent ones that I think are exemplary, to share with the audience about how to do this right and what's possible.
I'd like to talk about a webinar that one of my B2B clients ran just a couple of weeks ago. And this was one that was, it was some time in the planning, went through the full checklist. And this was for their kind of mid to lower funnel prospects. So these were not people who had never heard of their company before. This was not a brand awareness play. It was specifically around helping prospects make their next step in the journey. And they know that one of the things that their buyers struggle with is proving ROI. So they need to bring together a group of stakeholders to make a decision, but they need to make sure that it's going to be worth what they're spending, and they need to understand what they're going to get out of it. So this was toward their late funnel. We ended up with 100 people registering. And this was from a list of about 2,000, including some one-on-one outreach from the sales team to really invite people that they knew would get most value from it. So it wasn't a massive list. So that's a really good sign-up rate out of about 2,000 people. And we ended up with 50 people who attended the webinar. A good baseline is 25%. That's a really good turn-up rate. So 50% was absolutely excellent. Really showed us that we were talking about the right topic and we were targeting the right people with the invitations for that. For the attendance during their webinar, every single person who jumped on that webinar stayed all the way to the end, which is another great indication that this was a topic that they wanted to hear about and they needed the information. Also, the presenter did a really great job and kept the audience engaged, had done a really fantastic job with putting together the deck and making it engaging. We had tons of poll questions. We had 80% of the people attending that participated in all of the polls. So not only did we get the engagement itself, but we also were able to validate what we had been telling people. It was like X% of companies like yours do things this way.
Yes.
How do you do it? And it was exactly in alignment with the percentages that we had told them. So they got to see live that we were telling the truth about only is how big the problem was in the industry, but that they're not alone.
Yes.
Like, of course, people haven't moved forward on this. It's challenging and it's complicated, and we're here to help you solve that. And 100% of the people surveyed at the end said the webinar was helpful, which was excellent. Out of those attendees, 4 immediately moved into a later stage sales conversation. They were like, we talked about ROI, do the ROI calculation just for us. And of course, we're continuing to get more sales opportunities out of that as we go. So it was just a really good example of a webinar that was designed correctly, it was run correctly, and it was built so that it would continue delivering value. So B2B webinars are not dead. You just have to do them the right way.
Agreed. I love it. Now, if there are any questions that you guys have, please post them in the comments or ping us individually. We would be thrilled to offer you insights. Anything that could possibly go wrong, we have troubleshooted and gone through it and learned from it. And so we really want to be there to help you bring maximum value to your market. And so if you liked this episode, hit that like button. If you haven't yet, please hit subscribe. What are you waiting for? My goodness. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much, and onward and upward.